Welcome to Create More Intimacy, a podcast for men. I'm Alisa Stoddard, and I help successful men stop chasing sex and start building real connection so they finally feel close, connected, and wanted again. Have you ever heard a man say, almost proudly, "I treat my wife like a queen. I put her on a pedestal"? That sounds really good and noble, right? Like the ultimate way to show her love and respect. But here's the thing. Pedestals don't create intimacy. Believe it or not, they create distance. Because when you put someone on a pedestal, you're not actually honoring them. You're making them into something pretty to look at, admired from below, but not taken seriously when it really matters. I have seen this play out so many times. A man will talk about how well he treats his wife, but then in an argument, when she shares her position, he cannot accept it. He gets frustrated, maybe even angry, and walks away. The decision gets left unresolved. And that is the tell. That is the evidence that her voice isn't being treated as valid as his own. That pedestal, it's for show. So the real question is this: why do men do it? Why put a woman on a pedestal in the first place? Who does it really benefit? That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to episode 24, Why Putting Your Wife on a Pedestal Hurts Your Marriage. In my first marriage, the idea of putting women on a pedestal was just part of the air we breathed. It wasn't just my husband. It was his dad and his brothers, and even the way the men in that family talked. It was this cultural backdrop of you should treat women so well, you should put them on a pedestal. And at first, it sounds nice, right? Who wouldn't want to be lifted up and admired? But what I realized over time is that that pedestal talk didn't actually give me any more value. It gave me less. Take the gestures, for example. My ex-husband always opened the door for me. And listen, I am not against small gestures like that. But when they're paired with the mindset that says, I get the final say, that gesture starts to feel hollow. Because here's how it played out. Yes, he opened my door, but he also believed his opinion carried more weight than mine on decisions that really mattered, like how money was spent or how we handled family situations, what direction we were going as a couple. My input was considered, for sure, but it was never the final say. And this wasn't just between us. I saw the same thing in his extended family. His mom, his sisters-in-law, the other women, they were part of the conversation, but they weren't the final decision makers. At best, they were consulted some of the time, but I also know that my father-in-law would make choices with their limited finances that left his wife scrambling, deeply affecting what she had to work with to care for the family. His decisions rippled out and impacted everyone, but her voice was not given equal weight. So while the outside world might have seen a man or even a whole family who treated their women like queens, what I felt like inside that system was very different. I felt polished, admired even, but not taken seriously as a partner. That's what pedestal language does. It's confusing because it dresses itself up as honor, and it sounds like respect, but underneath it says, I'll treat you well in the ways that make me look good, while still reserving the power for myself. I know I'm not the only woman who feels this. Some women don't push back as hard as I did. They may have grown up in families, religions, or cultures where this is just the norm, where you're told, this is how men show they care. But even then, the cost is the same. Their voices are muted. Their opinions carry less weight. Their presence is more symbolic than real. For me, as an independent woman, that pedestal didn't feel flattering. It felt infantilizing, like I was something to protect and display, but not someone whose perspective truly mattered. And that's when I started to see the pedestal for what it really was. Not a sign of respect, but a way to keep me in a role that looked good on the outside while denying me a voice on the inside. So before we go demonizing the whole pedestal thing, let's find out where it comes from. For a lot of men, it starts in the family. You hear your dad or your uncles talk about how a real man puts a woman on a pedestal. You notice your mom or grandmother being spoken of with praise, but maybe she's described as the rock of the family or the heart of the home. She's admired, she's cared for, but when it came time for decisions, money, discipline, moves, big choices, it was the men who had the final word. That gets absorbed. Even if no one sits you down and says, here's how it works, you just see it modeled and you carry it forward. Then there's society. Think about all the little messages men get growing up. Be a gentleman. Ladies first. Open doors. Carry heavy things. Pay for dinner. Protect her. None of those things are bad. In fact, they're thoughtful and they can come from a place of care. But if that's all you know, you can start to believe that the performance of honoring is the same as building a partnership. And that is where the disconnect happens. Because what does ladies first really mean if behind closed doors, her opinions don't actually carry the same weight as yours? What does opening a door mean if in the next moment you shut the door on her perspective in a decision? For some men, religion or cultural traditions layer on top of this. Well-meaning teachings about honoring women can sometimes get tangled up with the idea that men should still hold the final authority. Again, not because anyone set out to demean women, but because that was the model handed down. And for generations, that was considered normal. So you grew up believing that putting a woman on a pedestal is the ultimate form of respect. You think, if I provide, if I protect, if I do the gentleman things, then I've done my job. But here's the problem. When you look closely, that pedestal often leaves women admired but unheard, visible but voiceless, honored in words but not included in weighty decisions. And that's not intimacy, that's theater. So the invitation here isn't to reject your upbringing or criticize the traditions you were taught. It's to broaden your perspective, to invite you to modernize your marriage and to pause and ask yourself, where did I learn this idea of honoring women? Do my gestures actually draw us closer, or do they keep her up on a shelf? Do I treat her like a symbol to make me feel good as a man, or like a partner whose voice matters as much as mine? Because if your model of respect came mostly from what you saw, not from what you examined, there is a good chance you're standing on the script that you didn't even write, and that script may not be serving either of you. Here's a part that's even harder to admit. Sometimes the reason men put women on pedestals isn't really about her at all. It's about him. Because when you put your wife on a pedestal, you get to feel like a hero. You get to say, I treat her so well. Look at all the things I do for her. And admittedly, that feels good. It checks the box that you are a good husband, a respectful man, an honorable provider. You can tell yourself that you're doing right by her without ever having to wrestle with the harder work of sharing power, listening deeply, and sometimes letting her way be the final way. And when you think about it, that pedestal also gives you cover. Because as long as you're doing the visible things, the opening doors, providing financially, bragging to your buddies about how well you treat your wife, you don't have to ask the tougher questions. Like, do I let her voice weigh as much as mine when we disagree? Do I stay in the room when her perspective challenges me? Or do I get frustrated and walk away? Do I really know her? Or am I just admiring the idea of her that I have created? And here's something else that pedestal language lets you avoid, and it's a biggie: empathy. Admiration is not empathy. Courtesy isn't connection. Saying she's above you doesn't mean you've entered into her world or felt what it's like to carry her load or let her perspective change you. Empathy requires humility. It requires slowing down long enough to actually hear her, even when it's uncomfortable. It requires being willing to feel what she feels instead of staying safe in the role of noble husband who treats her so well. That's why pedestal talk can become a shortcut. Instead of building intimacy, you can substitute admiration. Instead of wrestling with your own defensiveness or pride, you focus on how noble you look to others. I think about one man who used to tell everyone, "I treat my wife like gold." He made sure she had flowers. He held her hand in public. He was quick with the compliments. But when it came to money decisions or parenting or anything where they disagreed, he'd shut down. He'd get angry. He'd walk out of the room and leave things unresolved. From the outside, he looked like the perfect husband. Inside that marriage, his wife felt small and unheard. What you've just seen is the hidden motive. Putting her on a pedestal lets you feel good about yourself while excusing you from empathy and absolving you from the real work of being a partner. You may believe she feels honored and treasured and even special, but what most women feel is distance. Because admiration without empathy creates loneliness. You can praise her to your buddies, buy her gifts, or tell her she's the queen, but if you don't treat her perspective as valid when it counts, she'll end up feeling invisible. She may look honored from the outside, but inside, she feels voiceless. And that's the deeper cost of the pedestal talk. It keeps you from true intimacy. Intimacy requires empathy, and empathy isn't just about saying, "You're perfect." It's about saying, "I see you, I hear you, and I want to understand you." Empathy looks like staying in the room when she's upset instead of walking out. It looks like asking questions when you don't agree instead of shutting her down. It looks like tolerating the discomfort of not having the final say and realizing that intimacy grows more from connection than from control. That's what most women actually want. Not the pedestal, not the performance. So what do you do instead of putting her on a pedestal? The shift is simple, but it isn't easy. Move from performance to presence. Because the truth is, your wife doesn't want to be worshipped. She wants to be known. She doesn't want to be polished and displayed. She wants to be seen and heard and valued as she really is. Respect isn't about gestures that look good from the outside. It's about what you're willing to do when no one's watching. It's about staying in the hard conversations instead of storming off or shutting down. It's about listening long enough for her perspective to land. It's about letting her voice influence you, even when it means you don't get the final say. That's where intimacy actually grows. Not on a pedestal, but in the everyday moments where you show her, your reality matters to me as much as my own. And here's the unexpected part. When you stop trying to be the hero and start trying to be a partner, the relationship gets better for both of you. She feels valued, and you get the closeness you've been craving. Because intimacy doesn't come from admiration, it comes from connection. So what does that look like in real life? It's not complicated, but for sure it takes practice. Instead of saying, I treat her like a queen, ask her, what makes you feel most respected by me? Instead of storming out when you don't agree, stay in the room and say, help me understand why this matters so much to you. Instead of assuming your gestures prove your love, check in and see if they actually land. Ask, does this feel meaningful to you, or would something else feel better? Instead of trying to be the hero, aim to be her partner. Share the weight of decisions, even when it stretches you. That is the real measure of intimacy. Not how good you look on the outside, but how connected she feels on the inside. Here's the bottom line. Putting your wife on a pedestal isn't respect, it's performance. And it might look good from the outside, but from the inside, it leaves her feeling small and unheard and disconnected from you. She doesn't want to be worshipped. She wants to be known. She doesn't want to be polished and admired from a distance. She wants to be in it with you, side by side, voice to voice, heart to heart. That's what creates real intimacy, not the pedestal, not the performance. So if you're starting to recognize yourself in this, don't beat yourself up. Most men learn this without ever questioning it. But now you have a chance to do something different. Because the shift from pedestal to presence isn't about doing more for her. It's about being more with her. That's where the closeness grows. That's where the intimacy feels real. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If something in this episode hit home, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more men find the support they need. And if you are ready to get help or take the next step, you'll find the link to book a free call in the show notes. I'll see you next time.